First of all, good afternoon. Thank you for being here and welcome to Spring Glen Church's educational workshop on dementia care beyond the fear. We'll be led by the Reverend Dawn Jefferson.
Sorry, Claire, 1 second.
Did anybody hear anything I said? No. I'll start over. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here. This is Spring Glen Church's educational workshop on dementia care beyond the fear, which will be led by the Reverend Dawn Jefferson, who is Minister for Mission and Justice at Hope United Church of Christ in Alexandria, Virginia. Through the wonders of technology, we are able to join with Dawn in this virtual setting to learn about dementia in many aspects, practical and spiritual. My name is Claire Robert, chaplain at Spring Glen, and on behalf of Senior Pastor Jack Davidson and the leadership and membership of Spring Glen, we are especially glad to be able to offer this workshop today and the programs that follow as part of our ministry to all people. As an open and affirming church of the United Church of Christ, we believe that no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome among us. And most especially today, we affirm that differences based on cognitive impairment are understood and held in the love of God, neighbor, and self. And we are committed to making that visible in our gatherings, in our prayer, and in our fellowship. We're so glad to have Reverend Dawn Jefferson here to lead us. Many of us know her from the time that she was a member in discernment at Spring Glen. She currently participates in our peer caregiver support group. Pastor Dawn brings her special gifts and experience to our time today. She devoted much of her work at Yale Divinity School when she was receiving her Master of Divinity degree to these questions of faith and the practical dimensions of ministry to persons with dementia and their caregivers. She herself is a caregiver to her parents. She knows the struggles that this illness brings. She is committed to illuminating the path of caregivers and the beloved people for whom they care. And so we just want to thank you initially, Dawn, for this commitment, for being with us today to share your knowledge, your insight, and your faith. This workshop and the other programs which follow are brought to us in part through the generosity of the Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ, from a special grant from the Ann Higgins Fund. We want to thank the conference for their support and their understanding of how important this topic is to our churches and our communities as we all seek to become more welcoming of all people and more friendly to persons with dementia. The meeting is being recorded and it will be posted to YouTube soon afterwards. At the end of the session today, we are going to share a survey that will help our ministry. So we ask you to please fill it out. It will help as we organize the support groups and workshops to follow. Let's begin.
God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God shall help her just at the break of dawn. Will you pray with me? God, be with us in the acknowledging, in the process of acceptance, in the application of grace. We know that this is a kind of beginning for some, and this is a tougher part of the journey for others who have been in the midst of dementia caregiving for a while. We pray that something shared here today might spark some hope, offer clarity, and instill encouragement that we are already up for the task. That with you, your spirit, with your grace and this community, we can live well, love well, and care well. In Christ's name, I pray, as you can pray to the God of your own understanding. Amen. Friends, hello. Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Jefferson, and this is one of my personal scriptures on the screen. It's one of the scriptures that my parents were inspired by to choose my name. And the inherent metaphor feels very appropriate for what I discover through dementia care. I just wanted to put that up here for you to consider throughout the rest of our time together today. Again, formally, good afternoon. I want to thank Pastor Jack and Pastor Claire and my Spring Glen Church family for inviting me to share with you this afternoon. Certainly the Southern New England Conference for their support. And I hope it is the beginning of some talks, and I look forward to making myself available to extend this conversation for those of you who have questions and important testimonies to share.
Pause for technical.
Hold on, sorry, I've got some technical issues. This is new for me, this one. This hasn't happened in a while. Okay. Gonna go back to the scripture. And there we go. That's the scripture. Let me see if I can pull it so you can see the whole screen. You can see the whole screen now?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right. Wonderful. There that is. Let's carry on. So that was the scripture. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God shall help her just at the break of dawn. They say that a preacher should preach from their scabs, not from their wounds. I will confess that this journey is still a wound. It's going on even now. Oftentimes when I'm ministering or even preparing material for presentation, I will get a phone call from my mother's nursing home or my dad's nursing home. And I realize the journey is still going on. Caregiving, not unlike parenting or marriage, is ongoing. It's happening even as we sit here in this Zoom. Something said will make us think of our loved ones whom we care about, worry about, pray for. They're on our minds and in our hearts. Today, we come to acknowledge the challenges of living with dementia and caregiving for those living with dementia, and a whole bunch more added on in faithful, loving care. As I'm presenting and talking, you may type questions in the chat, or if they're private, you want them to stay anonymous, you can reply to Karis, you can wait. She's our moderator. We shall remain muted for today's presentation so that there are a few distractions, and offer time for more specific conversation in our next session, reserved specifically for those living close to dementia. I would like to address your questions after I talk a bit, unless I need to clarify something as we go along. So I plan to talk for about 20 minutes, then I'm going to break for questions and discussion. Then I'll talk again for 20 more minutes, take a full break for everyone to breathe, or a body break, and then continue on for 20 more minutes, and then again, stop for questions. So I plan for us to break completely and leave together today at 5 p.m., just for your time gauging. I chose to study this topic for very personal reasons. I am a caregiver to parents who both have dementia with different expressions. I am also a pastor. And I've compiled this presentation to be shared with similar groups of people with dementia, caregivers of people with dementia, and pastors or lay leaders who minister to people and their caregivers. After having watched the changes in my own parents over the course of the last 10 years, I have noticed a great deal about how this condition affects its patients and those they love. And for the purposes of this presentation, I will often refer to what I have witnessed with my own parents as examples. And I do understand that your examples and experiences may vary. I want to clarify for the record that I am not a medical professional. I am an ordained minister, and I am a daughter, and that's what brings us here today. I am an only child. I was born to Alma and Robert. This is them on their honeymoon. They were a striving and upwardly mobile young Black couple who decided to move to the suburbs when they had a child. My father was an architect for IMPay, and my mother was a human resource manager at TWA for what were at that time called flight attendants. They sent me to Montessori school and then private school because I was labeled gifted at the age of 3. Much of this care partner journey invites you, forces you to be reflective. I look like my mother. We have the same nose and eyes and smile. When people look at me while I take care of my mother, they are not confused by our relationship. I look like her, move like her. She's my mom. And if you hear me laugh, loud and awkward, free, the laugh will be like my dad's laugh. He's not actually as goofy as he seems in this picture, but there are days that I need to remember him laughing like this, to remind myself that I have laughed deeply. In these pictures, taken 5 minutes apart, I am about to leave on an airplane to Chicago for my first trip away from home on a plane by myself. I was off to a month-long summer program at Northwestern. And what you can't see in this picture is the wall of books behind my mom. There is an entire shelf of leather-bound Encyclopedia Britannicas that my father invested in. And some weekends, we would go on journeys through those pages. He and I would take out all of the volumes that related to a given topic and just hop from book to book, exploring, taking notes, looking at the color photos. And to my mother's left in this picture is the humongous Merriam-Webster dictionary, where she would send me when I didn't know the meaning of a word. And if I may just share that for people I know very closely, for people not native to this country, for people marginalized by race and class, and for people who are striving for a kind of success and rest in America, education can be an equalizer. My parents believed that. They taught me the same, even so much that I have a career in education, having been a high school English teacher and administrator in private schools for 20 years. Why do I share all this? Not out of hubris, but for context. That is to say that I was taught that intellectual acumen gave you power. When you studied hard and read more books, when you could analyze and demonstrate your cerebral skills, people would respect you, even accept you. Of course, I feel a little bit differently about that now that I have watched both of my parents suffer from depression, mental illness, and cognitive decline of dementia. I can see that while education can be marvelous, it also has its limitations. So I was watching the latest episode of the NBC drama This Is Us last night. Not sure if you're familiar. It was at the recommendation of my wife because the main character on this NBC show has Alzheimer's. And as we watched the show together, we held hands in our own grief. My wife having lost her mother 2 years ago, and me being in a kind of anticipatory grief. What the mom on the show expressed happened to be our truth, that our mother is our best friend. So while I love my father dearly, I'll go more in detail about my experiences with dementia through my mom and my best friend. Her name is Alma Teresa Jefferson. My mother is the eldest of 5 siblings. She was called the captain. My aunt is on this Zoom someplace. She can verify that. She steered a tight ship, maybe too tight sometimes. In some ways, she was a perfectionist. Her hair and nails and suits just so. She expected the same of me. She has always worked in an office, whether around paper or computers. She has always loved God. My mom's aunt was like a grandmother, was a Pentecostal preacher. And she tells stories of visiting the storefront on Saturdays to sweep out the church and set up the folding chairs. Now, it was my father who recited the "Now I lay me down to sleep" prayer each night, and my mother who took me to church every week until I moved away to college. My parents believed that if I went to church, it would keep me connected with our Black community, and that while going to a private school, if I was around the Black church each week, I wouldn't forget who I am. What even they may not have been able to predict was that I would grow deeply connected to God, so much so that I felt God's calling to the ministry. In these pictures, my mom is pictured here in white. She was ordained as a deaconess in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, which for almost a century was the only ordained role that women were allowed to have in that denomination. My mother told me once that outside of having me, being ordained as a deaconess was the thing she was most proud of. She was so honored to serve in this way. And as a deaconess, she prepared the communion table, prayed for members, and visited those in the hospital and members who could not return to church anymore. In December 2019, after my mother agreed to move to Virginia, closer to my wife and I, and live in independent living apartments in a continued care retirement community, she was assessed by a neurologist. The neurologist's note says, quote, "No diagnosis found," end quote. 75-year-old female here to establish care for dementia. Her clinical picture is consistent with Alzheimer's disease, with behavior disturbance. Appears the onset was likely a few years ago. I spend time telling you the story of my mother because sometimes a diagnosis doesn't tell the whole story. What dementia has taught me is how to love through memory and presence. I recognize that as an only child, I hold the memory of my mother, even differently than her living siblings do. And especially as her care partner and as a minister, I'm learning that true ministry grows from relationship. I have always been my mother's daughter. It is her self-proclaimed and proudest achievement. But I didn't become a better caregiver until I repositioned myself to hold her stories. The one I remember and the one that is still being written. And there are things about my mother that she will never again recall or on her own because of dementia. But just as she kept dozens of pictures of my first step and my first strawberry shortcake bicycle, I now am gifted with paying attention enough to offer her story to others. This, my friends, is the gospel, holding a story and sharing it in community. This is what God does. God holds our story. And this is what God calls us to do for each other. Now, one of the more challenging parts of living around this diagnosis is seeing how others react to it. And when I shared with friends and family about the early onset Alzheimer's diagnosis for my mother, people were so sorry. They spoke as if she had died. And when I mentioned to her neighbors that she would be moving from independent living to assisted living, it was perceived as a death sentence. Oh dear, I'm so sorry. On our end, we had spent months working to clarify the diagnosis, appointments, meetings, and find the kind of care my mother needed. We hadn't done all that for her to just die. We were busy trying to help her enjoy and experience her life instead of her stumbling over the frustration and confusion of her own dementia. As many diseases or experiences perceived as handicaps, we, yes, I did initially too, when we see a handicap, we assume grave limitations. I shall speak about hypercognition later, but the main issue with dementia is when we notice that our loved one stops doing things as easily as they did before. What we must understand is they are functioning with a changing brain. They are working to understand their own confusion as well. And what used to be easy seems way more difficult. I have heard it told, imagine the garbage can that exists in your kitchen right now. Picture it if you can. Ours is a white one. It's in a little drawer. We pull it out. What it looks like, what it's next to, are you picturing? Imagine that you are cooking in the kitchen and you go to throw away something, but the garbage can is not where you expect it to be. Where did it go? Who moved it? I have to throw this banana away. Now imagine that every piece of furniture in the house you know is moved around and feels unfamiliar. And outside of memory issues, because that's not all dementia is, sometimes folks with dementia feel that way in their bodies, like stuff has been moved around and they're trying to get their bearings all over again. Certainly, some of my mom's skills have declined throughout time, but she is still capable of many things for which she is proud. She responds boldly to the Alexa device in her room. I say, good morning, she says back. She listens to music. She still pops her fingers or taps her foot and imagines herself dancing in her chair. And when she speaks to her friends, she speaks lovingly and tries to offer them comfort and always a prayer. After meditating on Nancy Eastland's disabled theology, disabled God, I started to see the connections with how we view people as disabled and what dehumanizing effects that has. As soon as we enter into discussions about dementia, we assume that the end is near and that little good can change, get better, or come from the circumstances. But friends, that response is certainly not a faithful one. So we need to do what we can to dispel of the tragedy discourse, to balance in the reality, and to consider what our faith has to say about it. There are plenty of pictures where my mother is smiling. Sometimes she smiles because she knows that's what I want or need her to do. to smile. But early on, she felt and mirrored the same exhaustion and frustration that I experienced while trying to take care of her. We were at each other's throats for several weeks. Mom, what are you doing? Why can't you do that? No. Why are you mad at me? What's wrong with your tone of voice? Like anyone, we've got to feel our own feelings. Care partners, give your people space to feel what they feel. And care partners, if you're angry, sad, or anxious, people with dementia can sense it. It's like a spidey sense. Part of dementia is heightened sensitivity to sound and emotion. They might also reflect back the same emotion you brought in with you. And now I intentionally start every visit with a calm smile. I don't try to force happiness for either of us, but I let the feelings in the room come as they may. Sometimes I'm sad, and it's okay for my mom to see that. It lets her be my mom. And other times she's frustrated and in the moment. And she might remark that it's because I'll say, it's okay, Mom. And she'll say, no, it's not okay that I don't remember. It's not okay that I don't know your birthday. And in those moments, I have to move with the tides. I have to take breaks. I have to remember that we are both human. And that, my friends, is my introduction a little bit. I want to pause for some questions, take some time to breathe. Let me know if there's something that I shared in the comments in the chat that's helpful or not, or if you have some questions you really need me to get to, then you can pop those in the chat. So we're going to have you all remain muted, but if there are concerns or questions, please type them in the chat. Again, if you want to stay anonymous, type it directly to Karis T. Slattery, who is our moderator, and she'll pass those questions along to me, and I'll see if I could answer them now or later. I admit that as a New Yorker and a lifetime teacher, I talk fast. So I'm going to try to keep slowing down. When talking with my parents and really anybody lately, I have to slow down. I have to take deep breaths and give folks time to digest and for me to reflect. So that is this point. Pause. Join me in it.
Di kurang focus.
Just a Reverend Dawn,
Yes.
would you at any, Mildred Hunt here, Bermuda, would you at any time made your mom or dad aware of the fact that they had dementia? Or would this be a definitely unspoken topic?
So it's changed up and down, but because we're New Yorkers, I'm generally direct. I will say that my mother thought she had Alzheimer's maybe 20 years ago. And it's sort of a mixed moment of a little bit of hypochondriac, but also like she could sense in her body something was different. And so it took us all a while because she was so high functioning. And we would go to a doctor. I went to a neurologist with my mom. She's such a funny person because she'll tell me she feels concerned. And then we get to the doctor and the doctor says, how are you, Miss Jefferson? Oh, I'm fine today. How are you? How are your children? No, Mom. So there were many moments where we were trying to get a diagnosis and she was trying to distract away from what would seem like the mental illness part of it. And so for the sort of psychological diagnosis part, both of my parents resist that, which I can definitely talk about in our next session. but in the sense that there's a cultural generational issue with both of my parents. When I started to drill down later on, when I started to ask my mom, like, what is the deal? Why are you resisting going to, assisted living or independent living or, something else? And she says, I'm not going to let you put me away. She had an aunt who had gone to a sanitarium. And for her, culturally, the concept of leaving her home, that was the option. And she thought I was going to put her away. So I had to walk through the entire neighborhood of all these different places to show her, this is not a sanitarium. You can come and go as you want. This doesn't smell bad. There are carpets and pictures, frames. This is a very comfortable space. All that to say that she worked very hard. As much as she could feel in her body something was happening, she also worked hard to pretend that nothing was happening. So naming the diagnosis wasn't helpful, which is why I have to give these presentations, because the word dementia didn't mean anything to either of them. If anything, it started to trigger her concept of going crazy.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Just because my mother is 95 years old, and that's what we feel she has, but we've never mentioned it, and I didn't think it was necessary to do so.
Exactly. So there are some points in the progression of dementia or any sort of real moment of not having clarity, that it doesn't serve you to completely continue to explain certain things. So there are days where my mom, where she'll say to me, she'll say, I'm a mess. What is wrong with me? And there are some days where I'll just be like, you're fine. Or there are some days where I'll say, you know what? You have some things going on in your brain. You have something called Alzheimer's. And that's sometimes the reason why you're confused. And she'll say, you know what? I didn't know that. Thank you so much for telling me. So it's kind of mixed. There's a moment of intuition where the explanation can help, or sometimes where it's not useful and we distract and talk about something different.
Thank you.
All right, I have a couple more questions I can try to get to here. I have no something. Oh, yes. So partly the conversation I'm trying to open up is that dementia is part of brain cognition. It's about a change in the brain. This is not a moral judgment on a person's character, but unfortunately, there's been shame and fear attached to this diagnosis. I try my best to sort of parallel it with heart disease. Has anyone on the Zoom ever had a heart attack or been connected to someone with a heart attack? People having heart attacks, are they horrible people that have done something wrong? No, we imagine that there's something in their body, there's some organ that's not functioning the way we want it to, or that it's best for their health. And I think that it's important for us to consider the ways in which we respond to these moments. It's actually really hard to share the diagnosis. It took me almost 1.5 years to use what we call the A word. My mother doesn't like, definitely earlier on, to answer your question, Ms. Hunt, my mother did not like the word Alzheimer's in the beginning of her diagnosis. I'm not exactly even sure that she knew what the word meant, except something about the sound of it triggered her. She was like, I don't like that word. And we've got to find a way to change the language around this, and also to make sure we're checking in with ourselves when someone shares with it. Because it's hard enough to have it happen to you than for you to have to sort of work through people shaming you for having some diagnosis. If people with dementia could control some of their behaviors, they would. Some of their behaviors are not something that they can change. There are moments when my mother jumps out in profanity. She did it another day. We were in the office for her foot, and she just said, "Oh," and everyone in the waiting room turned around, and I'm like, she's got to, like, is it not clear? Because is it, so there, she's doing her best. We're both doing our best today. Okay. Let's see, how long it took you to come to this? Oh, please, Karis.
Yeah, so I have a couple questions. Do you have any advice on how to better handle frustrating moments emotionally?
Sure. I can talk about those definitely way more in detail in our next session, which is specifically for dementia families struggling. I'll also give you some resources in my next session of the presentation of different videos where there are several people who just have specific videos on how to deal with frustrating behavior. In general, it's important to listen. Sometimes what people are saying, just like not without dementia, sometimes people are saying something out of their mouth that's not actually what they mean to say. And so sometimes because the brain might not organize all of the thoughts, it comes out in a way that's frustrated or physical. And so it's really important to try to listen because there's something they're trying to tell you, generally speaking, or there's something they don't want. And so you've got to consider how to hear them. I'm happy to go over some more techniques that I'm aware of in our next session, but also I'll share a link to several different videos that you all can watch. Karis, other questions?
Thanks for checking in. There is one from Maryland who says that she has noticed that other people sometimes react to Alan sharing that he has dementia as if he shared something shameful, even though Alan shows no shame in it. And I think you talked a little bit about this. You might have seen that comment and spoke about it a little bit. Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to respond to that. So yeah, shame just doesn't work anywhere. I mean, and as a minister, it's the thing. It's like, it's just a bad rap. We get a bad rap for the shame thing. We just need to remove it from our culture, from our churches, from our lives. Everyone is walking the best path that they can. They just are. And it's one thing when you know a person, right? Like even someone like Alan, I know Alan really well. He means well. He's an unbelievably kind and giving person. And so when you see a behavior that's different than the person that you know, there's no reason to go, to a shaming space. Asking questions is okay. I think sometimes it's important to clarify. As a teacher for a long time, if I had a kid act out in class and do something crazy, I would just say, are you okay? Like there's a way to just check in. Is there something you need to tell me? Do you need to go outside? And we can talk about those more specifically, the ways that we can help folks with frontal temporal lobe dementia, or all the kinds of different ways that they're expressing those things.
Can you speak to the difference between dementia versus Alzheimer's?
I can. I'm about to do that. That's like 2 slides in the next part of my presentation. So I wanted to start a little bit more with my story and the personal, and now I'm going to dive into the cerebral, medical, analytical. I did it on purpose because I think sometimes we start with that, and that's not where we should start. We should start with the personal. We should start with the story. We should start with our hearts. And I will now move on to that. I think if we want to move on to that.
Yes, and feel free to keep sending questions. I will keep track of them. So,
yes, please. All right, let's start it back up. As we transition to the second half of our time together, I want to stop on these photos and clarify some of what I think I'm learning by the Spirit of God about this caregiving journey. Very succinctly, although I was raised to be an educated, independent, and faithful person, it is the faithful part of my identity that gives me the superpower in this space. The more I think or try to rationalize about what's happening, the more anxious I become. The more I try to use my brain to think my way out of this, to solve the problems, the more aggravated I became. I have begun to accept some truths. We are all dependent on God, and to a degree, each other. And logic can only get you so far. Your superpower with dementia will be relationship. Relationship with your person, the person who's giving care to you, and the person who has dementia, and most importantly, your relationship with God. In these pictures, I'm telling the story of an interdependent relationship. I need my mother, and she needs me. In the first picture, in that first one on the left, my mom is praying for me. That's how she grabs your hands when she's going to pray for you. She's in a prayer. I went on. Father God, in the name of Jesus, is how she starts every prayer. The next picture, I'm giving her communion. That was a low day. She was not feeling well then. In the next one, I'm helping her talk on the phone at her birthday party. People are calling her and she is making sure to check in with them all. So you can just see the gyrations. She was talking to my cousin and explaining all about the cake and everything that was happening and all the party that they were throwing for her there in her community. In the next picture, we reenacted my graduation from Yale, and she blessed me by telling me how proud she was as she held my head in her hands. And this last week, we were able to get a wheelchair van so that we can transport her around towards greater fellowship. And that was a great day. She needs me and I need her. And I do what I can at every opportunity to remind her that she's my mother and I need her in my life. The journey can be amazing and it can also be difficult. I don't want to stand here and romanticize anything about this struggle, but there are opportunities. On the left, we were allowed outside visits during COVID, but the isolation resulted in serious decline in my mother's cognition. Then she was using her walker. The middle picture is some better days. That's my wife walking her down the hall. And then at Thanksgiving, she was in a wheelchair. And we had to feed her. She could not feed herself. And I would say that you may need to release the need for your loved one to improve or get better. Not in a sense of hopelessness, just in the reality of what dementia is. Dementia is degenerative. Things are going to change. And you may both move closer to a kind of healing that offers peace. And sometimes you may not. I hope to expound on that at a later time about what we expect about Christianity. I think sometimes people think Christianity is like, oh, I'm supposed to feel at peace. That means I'm a good Christian. Sometimes that the battle, the struggle in itself is about being a faithful believer. What I can depend on is God. What I can depend on is that something I depended on will change. Change is the constant. And the more that I have readied myself, the better. Of late, I have fewer expectations when I visit. It helps not to put too much pressure on each exchange and to regulate my disappointment. There was a question in the chat a while ago. Essentially, I would say we've been on this journey for about 5 years. In me knowing something was different about my mother. It took a long time to name it as dementia. I thought it was depression for about 3 of those years. And then we got that diagnosis at the end of 2019, and here we are now. I promised to give you a bit more information about dementia for those that want it, and I will give you the context for some of the ministry work I've been doing with it. So I did a reading course at Yale Divinity School, and I focused on these 3 texts to guide my process. Dementia, Living in the Memories of God by John Swinton is my absolute favorite book. I interviewed this man who is a brilliant person and a professor and scholar at Aberdeen in Scotland. Redeeming Dementia, Spirituality, Theology, and Science, and then The Disabled God. These are 2 really great books, 3 really great books about theology. And I'll talk more about them and quote them throughout the rest of the presentation. So here we go. Forgive me, the next couple of slides are me trying to share a lot of information in a short period of time because this is being videotaped. So remember, you can go back and watch some slides in slow motion. There are many people here with lots of questions and interests, and I want to honor that. There are some basic things I promised I'd share about this work, things I wish someone would have shared with me a long time ago. So here goes. This is the Dementia Umbrella. It helps to show you that dementia is a big term that manifests in lots of different diagnoses. Alzheimer's is not the only kind of dementia. It is just the most prevalent. And even now, there are scientists who are coming to understand that there's still things that they're learning that they called Alzheimer's that are not necessarily even something specific. So in some ways, Alzheimer's is almost like closer to the umbrella term, because you have to sort of rule out Alzheimer's to move to other kinds of dementia. And I recently learned that some of the symptoms overlap. You can have two different kinds of dementia. You can start off with one kind and end up with another kind. And I also came to understand that dementia is the kind of diagnosis that occurs after everything else has been ruled out. It is not specific like other things, like heart disease. It's not numerical. It's not qualitative in that way that somebody can just, count a certain number of brain cell blood somethings and say, yes, you have this definitively. Neurology is not a qualitative discipline. It has subtleties and a lot of nuance. And dementia is not like cancer. It has not been studied as long, and the brain is not as predictable as other organs. So much of dementia is still being discovered. Even now, there are different iterations of dementia that we are coming to see in light of the isolation in COVID. What is dementia? It is important to note that dementia is a scientific designation. It exists in the realm of medicine and healthcare. And I share this definition from the Alzheimer's Association just to offer some clarity. However, dementia is still more than just a definition. It's an experience. It's part of my life. It's not just a number or something I read on an insurance form. Here, dementia is defined as a decline in memory, language, or problem solving and other thinking skills. The challenges with explaining dementia are the ways in which it presents specifically and differently for individuals. We want to be careful not to exaggerate it or underplay its significance. The simplest term for me might be cognitive impairment. When I think of what is dementia, it is cognitive impairment. Memory loss within dementia is the kind that disrupts normal life. It is more than just misplacing your keys and remembering them later. It's the example I gave before, where the garbage can is not where it's supposed to be, and all of the furniture in your whole house is in the wrong place. Pictures like this are difficult and often misleading. They tend to make us believe that dementia is about losing your mind or losing yourself. And experiencing dementia definitely includes loss, but it has similarities to other illnesses that include loss too. I want desperately to educate more people about dementia so that the disease and people with dementia are not so often misunderstood. There is, in some sense, as many things, a limitation to definitions given by medicine and science. Still, when we hear of someone with heart failure, we get concerned about their activity level and their diet. We ask them to see a cardiologist, and we hope to take a closer look at how the heart organ is failing. Our cultural responses to dementia are different, but should they be? Dementia is about changes in the brain. Many happen over time. Also, many are detected late in the stages of change, almost to declines where cognitive abilities may be impaired. So as we minister to people experiencing dementia, As you walk through your own dementia, think more about how the illness is a status of an organ that affects a system in their body, not a deficiency in character, identity, or value. Reconsider that this illness has to define your whole self or consume your life. That is to say, any illness or experience can be that consuming if we let it be. So, this picture is helpful to me. It's important to look into the manifested signs of dementia. So in many ways, the point is you can't know about dementia until you pay attention to the behaviors and what people are doing. Too much attention has been given to memory loss. It's a thing, but it's just not everything. Often there are specific kinds of behaviors that accompany dementia, and I'll talk about those in a couple minutes. Specifically, initiating a task or following through with trains of thought are often challenges when having dementia because the brain is damaged. And I recognize that my mother began to isolate herself. Well, what is that, 2014? I heard from members at her church that she wasn't coming to meetings. My mother was obsessed with church. She went all the time. She went on Saturday to prepare for Sunday. She went on Sunday. She went on Tuesday night. She was there at least 4 times a week. And for her to not be present anymore was a flag. People drop out of lifelong passions. That's a sign of something happening. She was only in her late 60s when her dementia began to manifest. Her symptoms looked a lot more like depression than what we now know as dementia. So I kept trying to get her to go to a therapist. I was trying to send her encouraging messages, send her links to really good sermons, check on her, pray. That wasn't affecting her brain changes. Then she had trouble filing her taxes one year and just couldn't find any of the pieces of paper to file them. The task dragged on for 2 years. She would forget to eat and could not complete the steps in scheduling an appointment for her to visit the doctor. This was a frustrating time because I lived in California and she lived in New York. So there were all these phone calls and FaceTimes of trying to clarify, what's happening, Mom? Did you go to the doctor? I've got it, I'm okay. Over 2 years. Even more interesting, I think to Ms. Hunt's question, she was defensive about all of these things. It is unfortunate, but more than likely that loved ones have shame about these symptoms and may often hide them. My mother told me she was fine so often, that's when I started to question, like, you can't be as fine as you're promising. Something's wrong. There's some inconsistencies here. So do pay attention to the sort of more detailed story. When people promise you they're fine, 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 there might be something there. I chose this picture because it reminds me of how my mom seemed to struggle in the last 5 years. It seems that she wanted to complete something that she'd always done, her taxes. But for her, there was no beginning to her bridge. She saw the end of the bridge. She knew where she wanted to go, but she couldn't get it started to follow through. And that's the way I think of some of the cognition changes with dementia. So here are some statistical realities. I am feeling called to minister to older adults because of the dementia stats that are out there. The truth is that dementia as a diagnosis is increasing because of the relative extended life of adults in our culture. Older adults are an increasing population, and the longer they live, the more people develop significant changes in their brain. So in many ways, the statistic is more about how many older people are living than just how many older people have dementia. The older they live, the more decline has been traced. Everyone who is older does not have dementia, but statistically, the older population with dementia continues to increase. And this means that all kinds of institutions need to shift. They need to adjust for this population increase. And in particular, because there are so many faith communities with older adults, churches, synagogues, and mosques need to train their clergy to address how dementia will affect their members and families. I need to pause for a note to just say that there is a significant number of African Americans with dementia. It's somehow some horrible secret. While there are some correlations with age after 65 and 85, race is also a disturbingly escalating factor for dementia. That picture on the left is Rosa Parks, who I didn't know passed away from Alzheimer's. And then on the right is B. Smith, similarly so. The information here is from a while ago, but the idea here is that there is a high risk of underreporting in certain cultures and false positive results. So due to misinformation and cultural shame, dementia is often underreported for African Americans and is discovered at a much later age when very little can be done to change the situation. So many treatments are more effective earlier, and sometimes Black families miss out on that opportunity. So I just put that out there. Know that that is a thing, another moment of inequity. I told you how much my parents valued education on purpose, and it's likely that many of you do as well. It's part of our culture. But overvaluing cognition is what truly helps to create the environment where we become so afraid of dementia. Dementia is tough. It can be deeply difficult to cope with. But as a minister, I ask you, if your house, metaphorically, were built on the parameters and expectations of spirituality, of grace, and not on intelligence, how would that change us as a people? I was an English teacher for almost 20 years, and I saw what the expectation to be the smartest person in the room can do to young people. We reward that kind of presentation and expression, but that is not what God expects or needs from us. Faithfulness, love, forgiveness, yes, but not to be intellectually superior. So this quotation comes from John Swinton. Knowing about God may not be as important as knowing God, and that knowing God involved much more than memory, intellect, and cognition. So part of this dementia journey will be to release the need to be rational, logical, or right all the time, because it will not help you, not while building a sustaining relationship with your person. It took me a while to start releasing these intellectual expectations and leading first with my brain all the time, trying to solve, trying to think through it. And it was hard because these were the very people who taught me logic. My parents taught me how to use my brain. And how could they not now be working it out with their brain? It takes practice. And it takes grace. All right, friends, one more stretch break here. What we can do is definitely collect some more questions, but I realize this is a 2-hour journey and I don't want to, if you have to take a bio break or something, please feel free to do that. I'm gonna have a little drink of some water and I'm gonna come back in 4 minutes, do the stretches, do the things you need to do. So in the spirit of breaking from hypercognition, let's all take a moment to breathe. All right, Karis, if there are some questions that I can begin to answer, we can start to return. Hoping everybody had an okay break.
I'm just realizing I need to put my video on. Yes, so this might be a question for a future session, but when people have good days and bad days, how do you discern when something is a sign of a significant change that needs new support or meds or just an off day?
It's a great question, and I'm right in the middle of that journey. I think it's about how often the good and bad days are happening in a sort of up and down period. And I also think it has a concept to do with how long they've been on this journey. So my mom is a little bit, I would say, half past. She feels like she's in the middle of sort of mid phase to end stage dementia, in the sense that we can tell by certain parameters that her language is starting to drop. So there's certain words that she says the wrong words, like she'll just, I'm not, what do you mean, banana? Like, right, like, so when I know that that's happening, certain things are changing in her language. So for me, overall, that's a major shift, okay? But even inside of that, she has days where her meds have her sleeping and out, and other days where she is completely focused and moving her hands and doing things like that. As I think, who was it? Actually, I think Jack, it was your wife. She was describing that there comes to be a point where every day is a new day, and you have to get to a sense that yesterday is not going to be like today. And that's partly where I am. It's helping me to just assume that the last time I saw my mom, she's going to look different today. It kind of just helps me as to, which is of course completely dissonant, because we assume we know this person really well, they're going to be the same person, this is the person I love. But I would just say, again, succinctly, I think now I'm in the middle, and I know when my mom is losing a particular skill. Like her eyesight went away in the last 3 months. So I could tell that was consistent. And the more I see the major consistent ones, I can see the minor day to day. And now that we're in the middle, I'm going to just expect every day to be a different day. Grace and mercy.
Did you want another question, Dawn?
Yes, please, please.
Okay. Can you give some examples of responses to being told to someone that they have dementia versus ones that communicate shame?
Understood. Pardon me, what would I say? The question is, what do you want people to ask you when you're in trouble or in crisis? That's the first thing to think about, I think. And so I love to know that people are willing to help me. They want to ask me how I'm doing. They want to ask how they're doing, even though the answer might be really hard and horrible. Like, oh my God, he's totally freaking out. This is the worst thing that ever happened. It's an opportunity for somebody to ask you actually how, not the how you're doing, but how are you doing with this? Right? The question that is the worst question of all is, do they know you still? Don't ask that question. Just don't. It reinforces a trigger for all kinds of things. And it's not necessarily really a marker of stage, because there are days when my mother calls me mommy, and she's doing that because I'm the person that's feeding her or making her feel warm and fuzzy. So, but then the next day she'll be like, Dawn, what you doing? So just that question is just not the question to ask. But what I would say is that really think about what kind of comfort you need as a person when you are in the midst of really tough times. There isn't need for shame, because this is about a disease of an organ, right? So I think that's the quickest way I can answer that question. Any other questions?
There's one other one. And Marilyn says, and don't start every sentence with, don't you remember?
Yes, exactly, because the answer is no.
So there is a question about, can you help me not be embarrassed by unexpected behavior in public?
I'm not over that one yet. What do I want to say? I think a lot about how much I just as a person try to protect my mother. So for example, it took me about an hour to choose the pictures I put in this presentation, because there are still some pictures that I don't feel comfortable putting on the presentation. My mother wears a wig. She has braided plaits underneath her wig. There are days she doesn't have on her lipstick. It took me almost a year to not put lipstick on my mom before she was going out. That's nothing like she looked when she was at home the whole time. So all I want to say is that I think it's a hard journey to get to a place where you're really trying to protect your person and you don't want anyone to think anything differently than what you do, is that I love this person and you should respect them. I think breathing is important. Sometimes I think humor helps a lot. And what I don't think should happen is that you get to a place where you have to feel like you're making excuses or defending all of the behaviors. So I used to think a lot about other syndromes, right? I actually had a colleague who had Tourette syndrome. Whereas he wasn't going to sort of apologize every time he had an outburst. That was just part of his life. That's who he is. And so I think we want to get to a place where we recognize mom's going to do something. She's going to shout out the S word in the middle of the Chick-fil-A. Or she's going to scream, help me, I can't see. Because she can't see. Like, it's just the reality. It's the reality of what's happening. So I want to encourage you, but I probably don't have an answer of how you cannot feel embarrassed. It's mostly about how you come in your own comfortability with the fact that this person is amazing. And in a moment, they might do something completely unpredictable. Other questions there?
Yes. What if your relationship with a person with dementia is not as connected and loving as the one you have with your mother?
Absolutely. This is actually the heart of, I think, what started me on this journey. So quickly to say, in 2016, I moved to San Francisco because I was coming out as being same gender loving and queer. My mother stopped talking to me for 2 years. She wouldn't acknowledge my girlfriend. She wouldn't acknowledge anything that was happening in my life, which is to say, I know what it feels like to be in a really awkward moment in a relationship where the person actually needs your help to be well. And as far as I can think of, this is a Christ moment. This is the moment where I understand what I'm being called to do. I did not like it a lot of the time. I definitely did not like it when my mother was calling me at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning because she forgot to take her medication, but she won't say hello to my wife. And I just had to keep moving forward and asking myself, what am I doing? What does she need? Because the reality of it, folks, is I'm an only child and there wasn't anyone else. I had to make that decision for myself. Is this something I'm committed to doing? I don't think that toxicity is anything anyone should live with. So if the person is abusive, you have to create boundaries for yourself. If you need to find some other people to bring in, or that's the moment when the church community, when your faith community is supposed to help, if it's a buffer. So during the really rough times, my mom was nicer to other people than she was to me. My father had the same thing. He was very bullyish to me during sort of moments of his sort of extreme fear was really what was happening, but he was being really rude to me. And my wife came in one day and was like, listen, you are not gonna talk to her like this. Either you need our help or you don't. Which is the thing? Do you need our help? So yes, if the person is far along in the moment that they're not rational, you can't have that moment. You can't say, listen, do you want our help or not? But what I want to say is that it's difficult. It's a hard thing. And again, the culture that I'm coming from, I have a lot of friends who are queer, who have very strained relationships with the people they are now called to take care of. There are folks who are the sibling or the child in the family who was not necessarily, I guess they were the Bruno, as it were. They were the sort of forgotten, dismissed, not included child, but they're the one left to take care of dad. And I think that just becomes a personal calling. What do you feel called to do? And you talk to any minister, I feel called to represent God, to speak on behalf of God, but that doesn't mean I have a good day every day. It doesn't mean that every Sunday I wake up wanting to preach, right? So there is a kind of walk here. There's a journey of what is the calling. And if the calling is to love, then that's the calling. Hope that makes some sense. Any other questions?
There's no more that I'm seeing right here.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, so I'll just journey on for the last part of the presentation, and then we'll still hopefully have some more time for questions. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate this exchange and love talking to you. So thank you for your questions. All right, so I think as I was trying to explain, the beginning of my mom's journey wasn't super easy. And so I do share this document with folks. I can put this link in the YouTube in the description later on. My mother was not initially game to move or to accept her diagnosis, not in the early stages at all. After introducing the topic of cooperation, which I'll talk more about in our smaller sessions in a couple weeks, my mother agreed to come to dinner with me and my aunt. We sort of set up a thing. I prayed, I had a list, I had an outline, it was a whole thing. I did more prep for this than I did when I told my mom I was coming out. So I had like a whole presentation of the things I wanted to break down to her. And specifically, we went through this sheet, which is called the Senior Safety and Wellbeing Checklist. Places for Mom sends it out. So for any of you who are in that moment where you kind of have to have the talk, this was a bridge for us. It was an objective rubric. And my mom is a great student, so she likes filling out forms and getting the answers right. Having my aunt with us helped a lot because my aunt had just spent the week with my mother. We filled out the checklist together, and my mother saw for herself that there were tasks she was finding difficult to do on her own. We soon saw that it was not an option for her to stay at home by herself. Her apartment was too small, there was no wheelchair access, and it had no accommodations for seniors, and I lived in a whole different state. Independent living communities can be wonderful, especially when you move there before you need to. I can stay there forever. Find the resource before you need to. And this is really a part of the dementia world where the dementia goes on and on and on, and then it's just hard to make a decision. So we really tried our best to get her into a place before it really started to break down. My mother is now in memory care inside of the assisted living community, and it is not perfect, but it is a blessing. Even during COVID, she had someone watching her all throughout the day. And I tried, but I couldn't manage her medications, feed and clothe her, and sustain my own livelihood. I couldn't take care of her full time, and that's what she needed. It took me a long time to say that sentence. It's also what I needed. Care options are about being honest, and it's hard, it hurts, but it's worth being honest now than being overwhelmed later. So for those of you who are asking about particular symptoms, not until after many months of frustration did we realize that there are actual specific kind of behaviors that folks with dementia can exhibit. Noticing these behaviors can help you distinguish between things you believe are just old age, but are really dementia. Most importantly, there are things that folks with dementia are doing not to be mean or to frustrate you. They are not necessarily being stubborn or just doing it because that's who they are. They are responding to the information their brain is letting them understand. One night, I stumbled onto YouTube to the UCLA Health Center. It has several videos that explain the details of the medical reasons behind dementia. And then they have this fantastic series for caregiver training. So the person that asked about abusive behavior or responses that are, somewhat awkward and overwhelming. So they have a lot of demonstrations and several dramatizations that give you insight on what situations look and feel like and what you can do and what not to do. They offer practical solutions and can patiently address these behaviors. So this is actually, I might just do it myself. So that's the link there in the chat. Loved ones may not understand their own limitations, but you should respectfully remain in dialogue about them and know that whatever they are telling you is true for them. You don't always know what to expect, but having a toolkit helps. And know that you are not alone. Other people are experiencing similar situations that might be stressing you out. As I referred earlier, culturally, hallucinations were nothing I had ever heard of. I thought that hallucinations were for people who were addicted to recreational drugs. Not so. My mother had hallucinations for months and didn't tell us. She was deathly afraid of some person coming into her bedroom. She thought people were holding her hostage in the living room and not letting her speak. We had abstract paintings on the wall that she saw people in the abstract paintings. And these are definitely part of dementia symptoms, but we didn't know about them. And then when we did find out, we weren't sure what was happening, right? And then we realized this is dementia. This is not just, my mother was like, I'm bonkers, I'm losing it. And I'm like, no, you are not bonkers. You have dementia. It takes a lot of energy and love to care for anyone, really. There are some specific themes that can help direct caregivers and care partners in supporting people with dementia. Sometimes they just seem like common sense, but in moments of stress and overwhelm, I try to focus on these to redirect my concern and activity towards ministry and care. And as any perceived disability, people often overlook what is working, what abilities people who are ill still have and cherish. Take some time to think through that these days. So as much as that question was great, Jack, of like, what's changing? A lot of the times, there were times where I got so invested in what was different about what my mother was losing. I wasn't paying attention to what she had, what she can do. If you can still walk, do it. My mom can't walk right now. That would have been amazing. I'm like, we should have gone for jogs around the block with her walker, right? What does the person still have that they're able to do? And then watch out for patronizing tones and presumptions. Just because something didn't go well last time doesn't mean for certain that's definitely a skill that they've completely lost. We might get scared of what we'll talk about if we visit or call people with dementia. This is for the neighbors and the friends. My answer to that is get over it. My mom's friends would call me and say, is she gonna remember me? What should I do? I'm not really sure. Should I call her? Yes, call her. I'm telling you to call her. I need you to do this. People with dementia need company. Shoot, I need company. And sometimes they also want to be alone because they're people. We need to just be human and let them be human. Sometimes talking too much is not helpful. These days, my mom has her eyes closed a lot. And I know that it's because there's so much information coming into her brain. It's easier for her to live in the world with her eyes closed. Also, her vision is not that great. So it doesn't make sense for her to be overly stimulated. But she hears everything that's going on. And sometimes I can see that she closes her eyes because she wants me to shut up. She won't tell me that. So there are people that give you symbols around how to engage with them. I promise you, people are telling you. Authentic partnership is a whole skill set that's called authentic partnerships, and it can transcend what I described earlier as the tragedy discourse. You can engage while moving beyond what is sad. You can see the beautiful and complex human in front of you. My mother has a profound sense of humor, and that goes back to the person who's maybe dealing with someone that they don't have a strong relationship with. When I engage my mother's sense of humor, even in an embarrassing or stressful moment, we both endure. It really helps. She loves to tell stories still about her childhood and friends. Sometimes she doesn't have memories about being my mother, but I let her direct the conversation. We talk about what she wants to talk about at first, and then we find our way. She's still my mother, and she has a lot still to teach me. In this particular picture, I helped my mother call my cousin for his birthday, and she encouraged him, and she's talking in that picture. You can see her mouth is open, and she says, "It's a good thing to get old. Don't worry." He was turning 50. So she has her own sense of humor about what's happening to her and her own situation. Okay, there's a lot on this screen. I can't go through all of them, but I wanted them to be recorded in the video. Much of this information is inspired by the disabilities rights movement. And if, again, you read the book called The Disabled God by Nancy Eastland that I mentioned earlier, you will find such concepts. The surrounding culture and much of the medical world is counter to some of these ideas. But truly, to be engaged and loving, we must consider all of them. Most importantly, people living with dementia are people, and they are still very much alive. There is a whole person in front of you, more than a brain, but an embodied spirit. Ask yourself, how would you want to be treated if you had dementia? My mother hates when she hears whispering around her. She assumes someone is talking about her and dismissing her, and she immediately says, what's happening? What are you saying? What's happening? With her eyes, she'd be in the corner with her eyes closed. I'm thinking she's sleeping. And if I try to tell the nurse something like, put her socks here. What about the socks? She's always wanting to be included. You know why? Because she's there. And just because you can't always express a feeling or thought doesn't mean you're not having that feeling or thought. Dementia care requires an almost infinite amount of patience and discernment. It takes time to pay attention to the beautiful spirit in front of you. They may have the same sadness, disappointment, confusion, and frustration with the disease as you do. And they have the right to be as fully themselves as they can be. Let them be the experts of themselves and give them some time to practice depending on others for their thriving. We will all need grace to live through this. Now here's a slide of some particular resources. Again, I'm going to share these links in the YouTube, so if you go to watch the video, they'll be there in the descriptions. Time is precious as a caregiver, so here are a few resources that I found to be useful immediately because they help me put some skills into practice. They also address immediate concerns and needs. So I shared with you the Senior Safety Wellbeing Checklist and the UCLA Caregiving Training. There's also a woman by the name of Teepa Snow, T-E-P-E-P-A Snow, and she has a website called Positive Approaches to Care. She's been doing this work for 40 years. She has a whole network of training. It's not cheap, but the point is that she oftentimes puts out videos on YouTube, on TikTok, about how to deal with a person, about how to touch a person with dementia, how to address them, how not to come from behind them, all these very specific sort of body issues around how you engage with folks with dementia. And I find her videos to be super, super helpful and very down to earth, and she's funny. And I just came across a new site called Care Blazers. I think that woman is both a social worker and a gerontologist. And so she has lots of details, and those are some other resources. So what I'd love to continue to do is for us to gather all these resources, particularly those that are free and accessible to all. So if you come up with something that you're like, wait, you don't have this on the list, please feel free to email me and let me know about that resource. Also, for those of you, just as this is that moment before anyone else pops off, we are continuing this journey. This is not a one-hit wonder. This is a cultural moment. I'm trying to make sure that you have many opportunities to share with your friends, to come for yourself. So we are having a more specific workshop where you can ask questions most of the time. I won't even present all that much. On March 27th at 4, which is a Sunday, 2 Sundays from now, and March 28th at 12 p.m. Okay, so that opportunity is there for you, for us to really get into the details of how can I get some more skills, how can I get some more training on how to live with dementia. All right, I have a couple more slides and then we're almost done. Dementia demands that you establish a new relationship with your loved one. I think that was the hardest part for me and might be related to this question about when you're in a difficult relationship to start with. My mother is and will always be my mother. She will attempt to mother me until her last conscious moment. But the way she was my mother is not the same anymore. She will be my mother in a different way, and it will change every day for the rest of our lives. One day, I will walk in and she will tell me how beautiful and smart I am and how proud of me she is. Another day, she will be confused and not know that I'm not her nurse. She will call me mommy and will gesture for me to help her finish her dinner while I hold the spoon so she can eat. One day, she will sing the lyrics to her favorite song to dance to, which is I'll See You When I Get There by Lou Rawls. And the next day, that song will ring nothing for her, and she will hum to Pass Me Not, O Gentle Savior. Some days I spare my mother the bad news of the latest person who passed away. And some days I sit next to her while she is sleeping and talk to her as we did when I was 19, lying across her bed and downloading about the week, my troubles and my fears. We don't like being dependent. We don't like being dependent even on God. But that is what it will take to be a care partner. It will also take getting used to them being dependent on you and God too. There will be some days when I call the right people, pay the right checks, and show up on time to eat lunch with my dad. And there will be other days when I can't do the things I want to do because my grief has me deeply in its grip. I'm too sad to visit, or I can't bear living through another crisis and not call my mom up to tell her about it. And all of that is what makes me dependent on God and also on my parents. But God will always be there, even when they cannot. Lean not into thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge God, and God will direct your path. The need to be in control of your life does not just go away because a person has dementia, is a quote from one of our books. They too have to learn and submit themselves to a true dependence. Part of my calling for this journey is to pastor as many people now so that their younger hearts and souls will be ready if dementia is in their future. As a teacher, the more I went through this, the more I tried to backward design it. I was like, how can I move back in time to find a way to make sure everyone's ready for this? And I pray that I can love them and lead them into releasing when dependence is necessary. What if our hearts were ready to depend on God and on the care of those providing us love? So if you're a neighbor, a loved one, a family or a friend, and a care partner, you should process that we are all dependent on one another in the spirit. None of us actually has complete control over our lives. Our culture tells us differently. But to be Christians or people of faith, we should work to resist the modern culture's obsession with the lone ranger independence. Surely, we cannot live all alone and cannot sustain ourselves by ourselves. Not really. There are about three more last slides. This actually is my favorite slide, so I'll take a minute. There's a gentleman called Stephen Sabat who works with Alzheimer's. He says that the mind and the self emerge from relationships and are formed and sustained by and in relationships. Sabat advocates strongly that dementia does not destroy a person's sense of self. The self, he argues, can be sustained through appropriate relational encounters. So drawing on qualitative research with people who have dementia, including those in advanced stages of condition, of the condition. Sabat shows that even in the later stages of the disease, the self remains intact and can be encountered if carers can find the means and the insight to see it and to recognize its presence and to stay with it effectively. So he decides that there are three selves, not just him, but he elaborates on other people's theories. So the first self is the subjective self. A person experiences him or herself in the moment. Right now, I am on a Zoom. I am looking back at you. A person experiences themselves and they regardless of their memory. So whether or not I know who I am or what day it is, I still am me in this room, in this chair. That's a fact that can't be changed. Then there's a second self. And this self is the hardest self to sustain with dementia. So a person's physical and mental attributes, their belief system, characteristics, my biography, right? I mean, that's that question of, don't you remember when? No, my mom doesn't remember what happened last week. So these things can change over time. This second self. I might even change my belief in God. That might evolve. That's a changing self. Self 3 is wholly dependent on relationship and community, and how a person presents in the world through their social persona is this third self. If the community treats that person with a disability as a burden or depersonalizes them, then that self will respond. During dementia, we acknowledge that there is a significant impairment of this second self, but selves 1 and 3 remain and can be affirmed and supported. So we are the stories that we tell about ourselves and the stories that are told about us. And is this the Christian calling of community to keep telling these stories? The key point is this: the neurology of dementia doesn't destroy the self, says Dr. Swinton. Any dissolution of the self reflects a dissolution of community. Ubuntu. Who my mother was is not the same, not because of Alzheimer's alone, but because of relocation, of repositioning. Everything she knew of that gave her power and agency has been removed. My mother is now in a predominantly white environment. 98% of the residents are white. The only Black people she sees are my wife and me and the staff. Many of them are not native speakers. Some of them, they adopt her out of an affinity, but she's not necessarily known by the staff. Oftentimes, she's not referred to as a deaconess. She doesn't have a desk or an office the way she had all of her life. There are no files, no meetings for her to reassure her of her previous identity and status, and she does not have her home. She has lots of her things, but the relationships are different. My mother recognizes me and lots of other people. She knows my voice. She knows the voice of my wife. She recognizes touches that are familiar and strange, some that are loving and demanding. And Swinton says that people have constructed our loved one in such a way that they can be perceived only as losing themselves, when in fact it is other people who are losing sight of them. So when I visit my mother, I want to reassure her that she is a deaconess, that she is a beautiful Black woman, that she is cherished, that she knows God and God knows her. It's kind of my job to help that third self be sustained. People ask, what can you do? Usually of late, the Spirit directs me just to sit down. To either sit down by myself, to rest, to eat dinner with Marquita, or to just go to the nursing home and sit down with my parents and be with them. It's easy, like in faith, to get caught up in doing, preparing, being busy. I'm cleaning, I'm organizing the socks, I'm checking on the medications, I'm talking to the nurses. What is usually necessary is the being with more than the doing. The ministry of presence is infinite. But on the same side of that, if I don't visit my parents, there is not a long line of other people to visit them. That's where the community steps in. See, my parents weren't perfect people, but they were generous. They were great hosts. They went and they even visited people in the hospitals. And I have to admit that it makes me sad to see how much fear makes our community, truthfully, drop the ball on this kind of care. For all the people my parents knew, they should have more visitors. And if you ask any care partner, they will tell you they need a break. This is not rocket science. Go for a walk, sit on a bench, make a lunch or a snack, go to a movie, sit with them in church. That goes for either the care partner or the person living with dementia. Ask yourself, if you were really lonely, what kind of visit would you need? Not an elaborate one, just a willing, loving presence. That's what you can do. And almost finally, this quotation spoke to some of my deep theological fears, not just for my parents, but also for me. If God forgets me, I will cease to exist. But God does not forget us. God's memory is not bound by time, space, or neurology in the way that human memory is. Human memory is fallible, constructed, and uncertain, but God's memory is sure and oriented toward action in the present. So my friends, whatever happens to our family members or our loved ones, whatever happens to me, our identity is safe in the memory of God. Period. God is infinite and eternal, and we must rest our faith and theology in these truths. So it is when we start there in the truth of God's holding us that we can minister to dementia, to cancer, to depression, and to death itself. This is my last slide. Again, my hero, John Swinton, writes, when spoken into the experience of dementia, the Christian story has the potential to reveal and reframe dementia in vital ways. He calls it a counter story. Such a counter story offers a radical redescription of the world and of dementia. He says it challenges accepted stories of biomedical determinism, inevitable neurological decline, the nature of suffering, the prioritization of the intellect, the role of memory, potency, individualism, competitiveness, autonomy, and the value of freedom. Through caring for my mother, dementia teaches me how much I need her, how much I needed her to be my mother and teach me the language of God and prayer and patience, how much I desire to serve and care for her life as an expression of God's holding her. And this journey of caregiving reveals to me our Christian mission, expressed in Swinton's conclusion, that we must visit one another, spend time together, and offer friendship, respite, relief, listening, and a loving presence to both sufferers and carers. God is in the midst of you. You shall not be moved. God shall help you just at the break of dawn. I'll pause there for questions. I have a prayer for the end, but I want to make sure if there are other questions that came up near the end, particularly theological ones or things that are on your heart or that maybe keep you up at night.
Oh, thank you so much, John. I'd like to just pause for like a minute or two, if that's okay, just to sit with.
For sure.
Okay. But feel free to send more questions through the chat, and I am going to post a survey before more people jump off.
Sweet, thank you. Please take the survey. Please take the survey.
So Don, I do have 2 questions for you. The first one, amen to the comment about not beginning every sentence with "don't you remember?" But how can you know when the person actually can't remember, or if they are just not doing all they are still capable of?
I guess it has to do with how well you know them. How do I say this? Do you know a person well enough to know when they're lying? That's what it comes down to. I kind of know when my mom is BSing an answer, and I know when she doesn't really know something. And it's taken me some practice, but I can tell when she starts to elaborate in a way that has nothing to do with the question, or she changes the topic to suit her own way that she knows how to tell a story. I think I'm answering that question. Does that make sense? So there's a way in which I think you can discern the person's baseline ability to tell the truth or to not tell the truth. And you can get a sense for, she's not answering my question. And it may be that she can't. I'd love to talk in our next session way more about the sort of back and forth, the sort of dialogue that it takes in dementia conversation to just follow their train of thought. And I don't mean it to be pedantic or patronizing, but I do want us to recapture what I think is a kind of imagination that we often use with children. So when you have a toddler that's just like, hey, it's snowing, and you're just like, is it? Right? Like, do you say like, no, it's not snowing? You have to sort of consider, can I jump into the world that this person is offering me right now? Will I lose something to describe the snow with them? Will it be that bad for me to enter the truth that it's real for them? And that's the next portion of the moment, because I think we had to start moving away from all of the factual, logical things that we know. I don't know what happened. My mom was, she was eating lunch with my father-in-law, and he's like, so, what did you love to do in your job, or something like that, which was hard because it was a memory question. But she went on to describe a job that she did not have. And I was like, wait a minute, Mom, you weren't actually in charge. She had made herself the president of the university, that she was basically the provost of and so at the moment, my Marquita, who's such a savior for me, she was like, just wait a minute. And I stopped to pause to let her create the narrative. What is the harm? She's not running for president. She can tell the story that makes sense to her in that moment. So let her do that. And sometimes she comes right back around to something that I guess we would call true. But if she never does, again, what is lost? She was having a great conversation.
Thanks, Don. The second question I have is on the strategy of intention and appreciation for retained abilities. How do we discern the difference between affirming versus patronizing, and appreciation versus infantilizing?
that could be tough. It can be a thin line. I think you'll know by their response. I think there are moments, my mother is really clear when she feels we're not being respectful or appreciated. And then you just have to adjust. So the real thing in engaging with folks in general, you got to be in the moment. You got to be able to be flexible. And if you said something like you made a mistake, oops, I'm sorry, can I take that back? Or what about this? I'm sorry, what about this? So a lot of my engagements are questions that might be slow with one option. Hey mom, do you want Chick-fil-A? What? Do you want some chicken? Yeah, I'm not going to turn down chicken. Do you want fries with that? You want macaroni and cheese? Yes, I do. And that's not patronizing. I just have to get to the place of what is direct and clear enough for her to know how to answer the question, for her to get what she wants and needs.
So those are all the questions that I have through the chat. Is there any other? I want to be aware of time. It is 5:05 right now. But if there's any other questions, please feel free to bring them up now.
I want to acknowledge my friend James said he had some comments. Please feel free to put them in the chat. Also, people can email me. And I also want to acknowledge my high school religion teacher. I would call you Dr. Pasquale DeVito, who specifically started me on my journey to study religion. And he has come to this particular Zoom. And I have to say your name, sir, before you leave, because I love you. But my brother James, if there's something that you want to comment, I know you have a similar journey, and if there's something you'd like to put in the chat or just say before I have to pray out by 5 o'clock, go for it.
Thank you, Don. I just want to say, for those who don't know me, I just lost my mom last month, and we went through all the dementia. A few things that really stood out to me is that you have to stay attached to those people, because if you walk away, they'll eventually forget you. So don't walk away, be there for them. They'll recognize you. They'll start into these stories. And the other thing is that sometimes my mom was like, oh, there's my baby. Have you talked to Grandma Bessie lately? Well, Grandma Bessie's been dead for many years. All I say is, Mom, have you been out on the front porch? Just change the subject. Don't tell them Bessie's dead or try to correct them. Just be there for them and encourage them to continue to talk. And if they're sitting there not talking about anything, or they start talking about something about their history, I highly encourage you, just listen to them and ask them more questions, because you'll learn from them maybe something that happened when they were a little girl and they're thinking they're a little girl today. So let them have that conversation. And then the other two pieces is that music always seemed to make mom remember. She couldn't remember anything, but all of a sudden she was an old gospel singer. If you kicked into a song, she would carry it all the way out. She might not remember today, but she could remember the words. So encourage that. And the last piece is that don't forget to take care of yourself if you're a caretaker. It's so critical. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say, is just love them, love them, love them. That's all you can do. And I'm here for you, Don, if you ever need me.
I know you are, my love. Thank you so much. Everything James said was completely right. And those particular specific strategies will be the focus of our next 2 sessions. So for people who want tips and skills and those kinds of things, we're going to get into the meat and bones of the daily lived out experience of folks who are taking care of folks with dementia and folks who are living with dementia. That's the purpose of the next 2 sessions, which again are the 27th at 4 and the 28th at 12. Please fill out the survey and the link if you can. It gives me feedback as to what to focus on next time in particular. I want to make sure I'm cognizant of time, and I have one brief prayer to wrap us out. And so if I may now pray, Pastor Claire, yes.
Before you pray, I just want to thank you. There have been so many comments of thanks that have gone into the chat. And I mean, really, this was an incredible time together. You really have revealed to us so many things and reframed dementia in a way. I've heard part of this presentation before, but somehow the totality of it has really just opened my eyes for how much this is really a faith journey. And I think everyone who's listened to you is moved by it. And by starting with the story of your mother, I mean, there were tears in my eyes to see the way this story has unfolded and your faithfulness and her faithfulness. So thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who came today and spread the word, because this is really important that we continue to think this way, in this new way, in this very open way, and in this very faithful way. So thank you, and thank God for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Claire. Now I'm teary, bless the Lord. And yes, it does feel like I am called to this, and it feels so much the purpose. I know my mother is and would be really happy to know how this is going. Let us pray. Most kind Creator, thank you for holding us all in your memory and your care. Thank you for knowing our names, even when we forget our own. Thank you for your vision of human community. Remind us that we all do have enough to care for one another, that we are not mere individuals, but that suffering and celebration are collective, that who I am is made up of who you made me to be, God, and the story that people on this Zoom will tell about me. Let us continue to value story and soul above all else. As we journey through loss and grief and cognitive decline that is likely and inevitable, be with us. Show yourself gentle and strong. Holy Spirit, shower us with your holy love and rejoice over us with singing. In the name of Christ the resurrected, I pray as you pray to the God of your understanding. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all so very much. Absolute privilege and blessing to minister with you today. Be well.
Thank you. Yeah, she wants to
Love you, Mr. DeVito. You're on mute, love. I want to thank my Auntie Elizabeth for being here.
okay. She wanted us to fill out. Oh, okay. Say we leave. Mhm.
I think folks are staying on. Perhaps they have something to comment on. Dawn has left us, I believe, right? Yes. So, but I see that there are a number of people who are still on. If there's something.
I thought we were supposed to fill out something or respond to something, like an evaluation. That's what she said.
Yes, there's a link in the chat. I can send it directly to you. So it's an online survey.
Karis, I wonder if that could be emailed, since we have the emails of everyone, because
Yep.
it may have gone by a little quickly at the end. And I think that would be a help. And also to have the list of everyone who was here so that we could email them about the current coming up workshops.
Yep.
Would that be a help, Ellen?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. We can do
Okay.
that.
Okay, bye-bye.
We'll do that. Bye. Lots of
Okay.
love to you.
Thank you.
Well, Well, this was great.
Chris, you want to stop the recording and we can check in?